The first text my brother sent after I hit the emergency room wasn't asking if I was alive. It read, "Stay away from us until you calm down." While the nurse pressed gauze to my bleeding forehead, I didn't cry or beg. I simply snapped a photo of my hospital chart and drafted one email that would tank a multi-million-dollar grand opening overnight. He thought he was choosing love. He didn't know he was choosing to be an accomplice. My name is Claire Martin, and I can tell you exactly what betrayal smells like. It smells like industrial-grade antiseptic, cheap bleach, and the metallic tang of drying blood under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of an emergency room at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was lying flat on a narrow hospital bed, staring blankly at the stained acoustic tiles on the ceiling. The left side of my head throbbed with a heavy, rhythmic ache that synced perfectly with the loud beeping of the heart monitor somewhere down the hall. Blood, my own blood, had dried into a stiff, dark crust along my hairline, matting down the strands and pulling uncomfortably at my scalp. My right arm lay resting across my stomach, feeling like a useless block of concrete. The trauma doctors had encased my dominant wrist in a rigid, heavy plaster splint. Further down, my left knee was a massive balloon of fluid and agony, painted in vivid, horrific shades of violet and sickly yellow. Every tiny shift on the crinkly paper covering the mattress sent a white-hot flare of pain shooting straight up my thigh. On the rolling metal tray table pushed near my good hand, my phone began to vibrate. It buzzed once, twice, 3 times, the hard shell rattling aggressively against the metal surface. The screen lit up the dim cubicle. I turned my head slightly, wincing as the room tilted violently from the concussion, and focused on the bright notifications. It was a short string of texts from my brother, Owen Martin. He didn't ask if I had made it to the hospital alive. He didn't ask if I was paralyzed. The messages said, "Bianca is shaken. You ruined everything. Stay away from us." I read the words. I read them a second time. I lay there in the sterile chill of the trauma bay, waiting for the familiar, heavy tightness in my chest to form. I waited for the hot, desperate sting of tears, the instinctual urge to reply, to defend myself, to try and fix whatever chaotic mess had just unfolded. For my entire adult life, trying to fix his mistakes had been my default response to Owen, but nothing came, absolutely nothing. Instead of panic or heartbreak, a terrifying, glacial silence settled deep inside my head. The emotional connection simply severed, clean and sharp, like a live electrical wire being snipped. The attending nurse stepped back into my line of sight, leaning over me with a pair of silver forceps and a curved surgical needle. She was methodically stitching the deep, jagged laceration right above my left eyebrow. I didn't flinch as the sharp needle pierced my broken skin. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead on the ceiling and took a slow, shallow breath. "Can I have a copy of the preliminary diagnosis chart, please?" I asked. My voice sounded entirely flat, devoid of any pitch, anger, or tremor. It sounded like a total stranger speaking through my mouth. The nurse paused, the needle hovering just above my face. She looked down at me, clearly unsettled by my unnatural, stone-cold calm, given the battered state of my body. But she didn't argue or offer empty sympathy. She nodded, tied off the current black stitch, and handed me the thick plastic clipboard with her free hand. Using my uninjured left hand, I awkwardly propped the board against my chest and scanned the dense medical jargon printed on the hospital intake forms. Severe concussion. Grade 3. Tear of the medial collateral ligament. Displaced fracture of the right distal radius. Impractical. Spoken terms. My brain had been dangerously rattled. The structural integrity of my knee was effectively shredded, and my dominant wrist was snapped clean through the bone. I work as a senior field adjuster specializing in commercial loss inspections. It is a grueling, intensely physical profession. My daily routine requires me to scale 30-foot ladders, navigate the unstable, charred remains of industrial fires, and walk across pitched commercial roofs slick with rain or winter frost. I do not sit safely behind a desk pushing papers. My physical body is my sole instrument of trade. Looking at that stark black and white printout, the reality of my situation crystallized. This piece of paper meant I was officially grounded. My field work would be immediately suspended for a minimum of 6 to 8 months of intense physical therapy and recovery. 0 billable field hours meant a catastrophic halt to my primary income stream. My entire independent life, built on years of exhausting manual labor, was about to hit a massive brick wall. I placed the clipboard down on the mattress. I reached for my phone, unlocking the screen with my clumsy left thumb. I opened the message thread with Owen again. I scrolled up, pushing past his final, cruel demand. I was looking for something, anything else. There was no missed call in the log. There was no panicked text asking if the ambulance paramedics had managed to find the obscure service entrance of the venue. There was no message asking if I was conscious, or if I needed emergency surgery. There was absolutely zero inquiry about whether I needed someone to come down to the hospital to sign my discharge papers, or if I needed a ride back to an empty apartment. He had stood there. He had watched me fall backward into a gaping, unlit concrete service pit. He had seen my head hit the steel edge, seen me bleeding out in the construction dust, and his only defining priority was ensuring his fiancée felt protected from the immediate consequences. That tiny detail, the absolute absence of basic human concern, was the final hammer blow. It drove the reality of his betrayal so deeply into my foundation that it became a permanent, structural truth. I didn't reply to him. I closed the messaging app, still using only my left hand. I opened my corporate email client. I utilized the search bar to pull up the specific, highly sensitive communication thread concerning his commercial property acquisition. The subject line of the original, massive chain read, Glass Lantern Depot venue funding. I was the primary, legally binding guarantor for this entire vanity project. The commercial bank was only moving forward with the final disbursement because my flawless credit history, my steady, high-bracket income, and the deed to my fully paid-off duplex were serving as the concrete safety net for their $2 million bridge loan. I tapped the icon to reply all. The recipient list instantly populated with the heavy hitters: the primary commercial lender, the regional title company, the lead escrow attorney, the commercial mortgage broker, and the senior underwriting team. I did not use this email to write a long, pathetic, emotional manifesto. I did not complain about my toxic family dynamics or accuse anyone of criminal assault. Corporate banking does not care about feelings or family drama. Corporate banking only cares about liability and risk. I tapped the attachment icon. I took a clear, high-resolution photograph of the emergency room discharge file and the preliminary trauma diagnosis chart, uploading the images directly to the draft. Then, I moved to the subject line. Typing with my non-dominant hand was a frustrating, agonizingly slow process. Every single keystroke was a deliberate, conscious choice. I let the cold, unforgiving legal weight of the words settle into the digital space. Urgent notice. Guarantor. Incapacity and collateral. Revocation review. In the body of the email, I drafted a single, sterile, legally binding paragraph. I stated clearly that due to sudden severe physical trauma, my current employment capacity and subsequent income stream were indefinitely suspended. Consequently, I formally requested an immediate halt to all pending funding distributions until a comprehensive reassessment of my guarantor status and collateral viability could be conducted by my personal legal counsel. I read the draft over once. It was flawless. It was a perfectly professional grenade. The moment it hit those inboxes, it would trigger an automatic, immediate freeze on the hundreds of thousands of dollars Owen and Bianca desperately needed to close the deal by the end of the week. But I didn't press send, not just yet. I hovered my left thumb over the glowing screen for a long, silent moment. Then, I deliberately tapped the button to save the draft. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to see exactly what kind of public narrative they were going to spin, what kind of lies they were going to tell the world, before I dropped the hammer and shattered their dream. That night, In the freezing quiet of the trauma ward, I didn't decide to get revenge. I decided to stop saving people who didn't want to be saved. 4 months before hospital antiseptic took over my world, my days were measured in roof pitches, smoke damage, and claim deadlines. I was already deep in the grind, long before Owen and Bianca turned my savings into their runway. While the insurance executives sat safely in their climate-controlled corporate offices, I was the one strapping on a heavy safety harness at 6 a.m. to scale 3-story residential homes after a Category 4 hurricane. My bank account was undeniably healthy, but absolutely none of it came from blind luck or a generous trust fund. It came from grueling 60-hour work weeks. It came from breathing in toxic, heavy soot after devastating commercial fires and crawling through flooded, mold-infested basements in the dead of winter to measure structural loss. If you looked closely at my hands, you would see thick, yellowed calluses mapping my palms and tracing the edges of my fingers. My right knee held a chronic, dull ache from years of climbing heavy aluminum extension ladders carrying 40 pounds of inspection gear. Every single dollar I owned was quite literally paid for with my cartilage, my lungs, and my relentless sweat. My older brother, Owen, lived on a completely different planet. Owen possessed this innate, golden retriever charm that made people instantly want to forgive him and eagerly help him. He was a man composed entirely of massive, sweeping dreams and absolutely zero financial discipline. He could sell you the brilliant concept of a magnificent bridge, but he would never actually remember to buy the steel or hire the engineers to build it. He leaped blindly from one grand scheme to the next, always utterly convinced that the universe was just about to hand him his big break. Then came Bianca Vale. She was his fiancée, a lifestyle and wedding content creator who treated reality like a bad camera angle that just needed a warmer filter to be acceptable. Bianca was undeniably magnetic. She had a melodic voice that pulled you in and a perfectly curated aesthetic that commanded quiet attention from strangers. But beneath that polished, expensive cashmere veneer, she harbored a sharp, quiet disdain for anyone who did not fit seamlessly into her aspirational brand. To Bianca, my scuffed steel-toed boots, unmanicured fingernails, and dust-covered work trucks were not honorable signs of hard work. They were social embarrassments. She viewed me as a blue-collar tragedy. She tolerated my presence at family dinners because I was Owen's sister. But mostly, she tolerated me because she realized very quickly that I was the only person in her immediate circle who actually possessed liquid capital. Their grand, life-changing vision was the Glass Lantern Depot. It was a massive, abandoned freight train terminal sitting right on the muddy edge of the river district. Surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted industrial tracks, Owen and Bianca had decided it was their ultimate, shining destiny to transform this decaying brick shell into the city's most exclusive, high-end wedding venue. They cornered me on a rainy Tuesday evening, aggressively laying out glossy, oversized architectural renderings all over my scratched wooden dining table. They spoke in rapid, breathless, excited bursts. They had the magnificent vision. They had the aggressive branding strategy. They just needed the capital to bridge the temporary gap. According to Owen, the commercial bank was practically begging to give them the massive loan. The project underwriter, he claimed, just needed one tiny, insignificant formality to push the heavy financing through to the final stage. They needed a co-signer with a bulletproof credit profile. They needed a piece of temporary collateral to secure the initial payout until the venue opened its doors. I hesitated. My gut screamed at me to pack up their glossy papers, hand them back, and refuse entirely. I knew Owen's disastrous history with money. I knew Bianca's dangerous obsession with outward appearances over actual substance. But then Owen played his ultimate, devastating trump card. His eyes watered, his voice cracked with perfectly timed vulnerability, and he brought up our mother. He reminded me of the last week she was alive, the heavy oxygen machine humming loudly in the background, when she gripped my wrist with her fragile fingers and whispered her final directive. She told me never to abandon Owen when he panics, to always be his steady anchor because he felt the world too deeply. I had spent my entire adult life internalizing that dying wish. Without ever realizing it, I had twisted a dying mother's desperate plea for emotional support into an endless series of financial bailouts. I consistently confused loving my brother with funding his delusions. Against every single instinct of self-preservation I possessed, I caved. I agreed to put up my personal duplex as the secondary collateral. It was the only real, tangible asset I had. The property I had spent 7 grueling years paying off completely by skipping vacations and working brutal weekend emergency calls. I signed my name on the dotted line, legally binding my hard-earned income and my only safe home to their untested, wild dream. I became the invisible, silent safety net for their luxury venue. That same evening, after the mobile notary packed up and left my house, the ink barely dry on the massive liability I had just strapped to my own back. I sat alone on my couch, nursing a glass of cheap tap water. I opened my phone and scrolled slowly through my social media feed. Right at the very top was a brand new, highly produced video from Bianca. It was a slick, professionally edited montage of her and Owen standing confidently in front of the rusted depot doors, smiling perfectly into the lens, holding up a heavy set of vintage iron keys. The golden hour lighting was immaculate. The bold caption below the video read, "We built this dream entirely by ourselves, late nights, early mornings, and pure hustle. Nobody handed us anything." There was no mention of the massive bank loan. There was no mention of the guarantor whose flawless credit actually made the purchase possible. There was not a single syllable mentioning my name or the house I had just risked to buy those vintage keys. I was completely erased from their triumphant narrative the exact second my signature cleared the page. The renovation schedule bled out like a severed artery. What was supposed to be a tight, disciplined 6-month turnaround stretched endlessly as Bianca treated the architectural blueprints like a rough suggestion. Every week brought a new, catastrophic pivot in the design concept. Suddenly, standard industrial windows were not good enough. They had to be custom cut. Imported frosted glass. The perfectly functional wooden staircase had to be gutted and replaced with matte black architectural steel. Then came her absolute obsession with creating a cloud room. A designated, acoustically dampened photography space featuring hundreds of yards of custom-dyed silk and programmable lighting systems. Whenever I pointed out that these constant alterations were vaporizing our contingency budget, Bianca would just wave her manicured hand with a light, breathy laugh. She would look at me with profound pity and say it was just a little extra, and that the premium, high-net-worth brides would pay it all back in the first booking season. But a few extra dollars quickly snowballed into tens of thousands. Owen would call me, his voice tight with manufactured panic, explaining that his cash flow was temporarily paralyzed until the bank released the next major disbursement tranche. The general contractors were threatening to walk off the job site. The electricians were refusing to pull the high-voltage lines without a massive deposit, and because my name was the legal bedrock holding the entire project together, I was the one who had to open my personal checking account and front the cash to keep the pulse of the project beating. Owen always swore he would reimburse me the very second the final loan cleared. It did not take long for the dynamic to shift completely. Bianca stopped seeing me as the financial savior of her dream and started treating me like her personal logistics assistant. My phone would light up at 2 a.m. with rapid-fire text messages demanding immediate wire transfers for custom velvet drapery. She would call me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, fully aware I was actively strapped to a safety harness inspecting a collapsed commercial roof, and demand I drive across the city to unlock the depot doors for the plumbing inspectors because she had a sudden conflict with her esthetician. The humiliation was not loud or explosive. It was quiet, persistent, and meticulously crafted. It was the way she sighed heavily when I asked for a receipt. As if my desire for basic accounting was a tragic character flaw. It was the way she spoke to me slowly, using small words, whenever I tried to discuss the reality of commercial liability insurance. Then I started looking closer at the paperwork. I found invoices that made absolutely no logical sense. There was a billing statement for $8,000 categorized simply as atmospheric consultation. Another receipt for $15,000 went to a boutique branding agency that seemed to exist only on a single, vague webpage with no actual portfolio. When I cornered my brother about the heavily inflated numbers, he immediately threw his hands up in defense. He told me Bianca handled the brand identity, that she possessed a visionary understanding of how to spend capital to make the venue completely irresistible to the luxury market. While I was draining my hard-earned savings to pay the structural engineers and the drywall installers, Bianca was busy curating an immaculate alternate reality online. Her social media channels were flooded with daily updates about building our dream venue. She posted highly stylized, slow-motion clips of herself walking through the depot in pristine white linen outfits, holding rolls of blueprints she did not even know how to read. The camera angles were fiercely controlled. She carefully cropped out the hazardous tangles of exposed electrical wire, the suffocating clouds of cement dust, and most notably, the exhausted woman in steel-toed boots who was actually paying for the concrete under her feet. The breaking point, the moment the ground truly shifted beneath me, arrived on a humid Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in the sweltering cab of my work truck, reviewing a municipal permit database for my own job, when I absent-mindedly searched the Glass Lantern Depot address to check the status of our plumbing inspection. My blood ran completely cold. Bianca had officially opened the venue for pre-booking. She had already collected massive, non-refundable deposits from 12 different couples for the upcoming spring season. The venue did not have a certificate of occupancy. It did not have a finalized fire safety inspection. The commercial kitchen lacked proper health department clearance, and the structural integrity of the newly installed steel mezzanine had not yet been signed off by the city engineer. She was selling a product that, legally speaking, did not exist and was completely unsafe to inhabit. I drove straight to the depot. I found them standing in the center of the unfinished main hall, arguing about floral arrangements. I did not yell. I kept my voice dead level as I laid out the severe, undeniable legal reality. Taking money for a commercial event space without a valid occupancy permit was not a marketing strategy. It was textbook wire fraud. It was a massive liability that could result in the immediate cancellation of our commercial insurance policy and potential criminal charges if the city regulatory board found out. Bianca did not even blink. She tilted her head, offered a condescending smirk, and called me the ultimate queen of pessimism. She crossed her arms and stated that in the luxury wedding industry, you had to sell the dream before the paint dried, something a manual laborer would never understand. I looked at my brother, expecting him to finally grasp the catastrophic danger they were courting. I needed him to step up and act like a business owner. Instead, Owen shoved his hands into his pockets, looked at the dusty floorboards, and told me I was making the mood too heavy. He begged me to just let them handle the front-end business and stop dragging down their creative energy. I did not argue further. I did not try to convince them. I simply turned around and walked out of the echoing, half-finished building. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my personal laptop. I created a secure, encrypted digital folder on my desktop. I spent 4 straight hours meticulously downloading every single text message, every padded invoice, every questionable wire transfer receipt, and every screenshot of her illegal pre-booking advertisements. I was no longer gathering documents for a construction portfolio. I was building a forensic trail. I was not doing it because I wanted to start a war with my own blood. I was doing it because a cold, undeniable instinct in my gut warned me that the day was rapidly approaching when I would have to save myself from the wreckage of their ambition. 36 hours. That was exactly how much time remained on the ticking clock before the commercial bank finalized the ultimate loan disbursement and the grand opening of the venue was officially announced to the general public. I pulled my heavy steel-toed work boots out of the trunk of my car, grabbed my clipboard, and walked into the cavernous, echoing belly of the Glass Lantern Depot for my final, comprehensive safety walkthrough. The air inside the massive brick building was incredibly thick with an electric, pre-storm tension. It hummed constantly with the frenetic, desperate energy of a construction project sprinting wildly toward a finish line it was absolutely not ready to cross. The venue itself was a jarring, cinematic collision of breathtaking aesthetic beauty and glaring, raw physical danger. High above the main floor, the imported, custom-cut frosted glass panels caught the late afternoon sunlight perfectly, but the protective chemical adhesive film still clung stubbornly to their fragile edges. The custom architectural staircase looked utterly magnificent from a distance, yet the raw structural steel underneath lacked its mandatory fire-retardant coating. Directly behind the newly constructed main stage, the polished concrete floor was treacherously slick with a fine, invisible layer of white drywall dust, and several vital structural zones were still aggressively cordoned off with bright yellow warning tape. It was a beautiful, highly flammable illusion. Standing right in the dead center of this chaotic hazard was Bianca. She was passionately directing a promotional soft-opening video trailer, wearing an immaculate, tailored white silk pantsuit that had absolutely no business being anywhere near an active commercial construction site. She was sharply ordering her exasperated videographer to constantly shift his camera angles, loudly complaining that the mandatory orange safety barricades and the heavy load-bearing steel support columns were entirely ruining the elegant, airy aesthetic of her carefully planned shot. I kept my distance initially, my eyes sweeping the perimeter like a seasoned hawk looking for liability violations. It did not take long to spot a massive, undeniable one. Positioned precariously close to the edge of the main floor was a colossal new addition I had never once seen or approved on any master budget sheet. A towering, incredibly heavy metal rigging frame designed to hold a suspended, custom floral chandelier. Worse than its unapproved existence was its physical location. The massive iron rig, sitting on industrial caster wheels, was staged mere inches from the jagged concrete lip of the primary mechanical service pit. The rectangular pit was currently wide open, a dark, sheer 6-foot drop down to a concrete subfloor, left completely exposed so the master electricians could finish routing the complex, high-voltage commercial power lines. Wes Calder, our veteran lead site contractor, noticed me staring in absolute horror at the sheer drop. He walked over, wiping a greasy, calloused hand on his worn denim overalls, and deliberately kept his voice low so the filming crew would not overhear him. He quietly informed me that his crew had properly bolted down the heavy orange safety barriers around the entire mechanical trench that very morning, but Bianca had explicitly ordered them to drag the barricades away. She had told Wes right to his face that the safety equipment made the space look too much like a dirty work zone for her luxury lifestyle video. A cold, sharp spike of absolute dread pierced my chest. I immediately scanned the massive room and locked eyes with my brother. I marched straight over, grabbed Owen firmly by his forearm, and physically pulled him away from the bustling camera crew and into the dark shadow of the back brick corridor. I kept my tone strictly professional, but layered it with absolute, undeniable urgency. I told him straight to his face that if they left that service pit completely exposed while hosting their exclusive menu tasting event for 50 prospective clients tonight, they were playing a lethal game of Russian roulette. I explained clearly that a single misstep from a guest wearing high heels would not only result in a catastrophic, life-altering injury, but would instantly void our entire commercial liability insurance policy and trigger massive municipal fines. I reminded him that the bank would pull the remaining $2 million of funding the exact minute the city inspectors dropped a stop work order on the front door. I expected Owen to turn pale, to instantly realize the severe gravity of the situation and call Wes over to secure the perimeter immediately. Instead, he let out an exhausted, deeply patronizing sigh. He forcefully pulled his arm out of my grip and looked around nervously, terrified someone important might witness our confrontation. He told me I was dramatically overreacting, demanding that I stop making a huge deal out of minor, temporary inconveniences. He whispered fiercely that several highly influential wedding planners and elite catering partners were arriving in just 3 hours to preview the space. and he could not afford to have me ruining the celebratory atmosphere with my constant, suffocating negativity. Before I could even formulate a rational response to his willful ignorance, the hard click of Bianca's designer heels echoed against the bare concrete. She had completely abandoned her videographer and marched right into our private conversation, her perfectly lined eyes flashing with hostile, theatrical indignation. She did not bother lowering her voice. In fact, she projected it intentionally, ensuring every single contractor, lighting technician, and camera assistant in the massive hall could hear her crystal clear. She openly mocked me, stating loudly that I was just desperately, fundamentally jealous. She told the entire room that because I possessed absolutely no beautiful life of my own to broadcast on the internet, my only remaining joy was trying to crush the creative spirits of people who actually knew how to build something visually magnificent. She crossed her arms, striking a picture of perfect manufactured victimhood, and sneered that my gritty, blue-collar mindset was fundamentally incapable of understanding high-end luxury. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my lifestyle, my bank account, or my career. I simply absorbed the public humiliation in total silence, my jaw locked tight, committing every single second of her venomous tirade to memory. I realized in that exact, freezing moment that logic, safety, and financial reality meant absolutely nothing in this room. They were entirely consumed by the shiny, hollow image they had fabricated for themselves. As I finally turned my back to walk away from their delusional theater, my eyes drifted upward toward the heavy, dark steel support beam positioned directly above and slightly behind the main stage. Mounted securely against the cold metal, heavily camouflaged by the deep shadows of the vaulted ceiling, was a discreet, commercial-grade security camera Wes had installed 2 weeks prior to deter copper wire theft. A tiny, brilliant red light was blinking steadily on the curved face of the sleek black dome. It was actively recording. And knowing Wes Calder's strict adherence to commercial job site security protocols, I knew with chilling certainty that the system was capturing the entire unbarricaded hazard zone on video and picking up every word echoing across the main floor. The confrontation began the exact second I turned my back, fully prepared to march out the heavy steel double doors and leave them to their spectacular ruin. Bianca blocked my path, materializing in front of me with the sudden, jarring speed of a cornered predator. She clutched a sleek leather folio and thrust a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents squarely into my chest, forcing me to take a step back to avoid being hit in the face. She demanded my signature on a brand-new construction addendum. She had unilaterally decided that the venue desperately needed a custom, elevated glass catwalk entrance to create a dramatic arrival experience for her imaginary luxury brides. I glanced down at the bolded numbers at the bottom of the page. The modification carried a price tag of $85,000. It was a massive, unapproved expenditure that had absolutely no sign-off from the commercial lender, no structural feasibility study, and was slated to be built in a zone currently violating 4 different municipal safety codes. I handed the thick stack of papers right back to her, my expression entirely blank. I stated with absolute, unwavering clarity that I would not sign a single additional page. I told her I would not authorize one more dime of emergency funding while unauthorized structural modifications were actively jeopardizing the final bank inspection and basic human safety. Bianca did not scream. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward, completely invading my personal space. The cloying, the heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume was suffocating. She dropped the carefully curated, sweet influencer persona entirely. Her voice dropped to a vicious, razor-sharp whisper designed only for my ears. She told me I was a miserable, deeply lonely woman. She hissed that I had absolutely nothing in my life except my dirt-stained boots and my exhausting, pathetic job. She looked me up and down with raw, unfiltered disgust and stated that since I was fundamentally incapable of building a beautiful life of my own, my only real purpose on this earth was to donate my money to people who actually knew how to live one. For 4 grueling months, I had swallowed every insult, every condescending remark, and every passive-aggressive text message for the sake of keeping the peace. but hearing her coldly reduce my entire existence to an ATM machine for her vanity shattered the final dam of my restraint. I fired back. I did not raise my voice, but I laced every single word with lethal, undeniable truth. I looked her dead in the eye and told her she was burning through someone else's life savings just to buy a fake, shiny image for the internet. I told her she was a financial parasite, recklessly dragging Owen into a catastrophic explosion of debt that would bankrupt him before the first wedding even took place. Something dark and incredibly violent flashed in Bianca's eyes. The truth hit her fabricated reality like a physical blow, and she completely lost control. Right beside us sat the massive, towering metal floral rig on heavy industrial caster wheels, the exact same unapproved structure I had warned Owen about moments prior. Bianca reached out with both hands, her knuckles turning white, and violently yanked the heavy iron frame toward me. It was a blind, furious impulse meant to physically intimidate me, to shove the heavy cart into my path and force me to back away from her in submission, but she did not account for the environment. She did not understand the physics of a construction site. The heavy caster wheels hit a thick, slick patch of the fine white drywall dust coating the polished concrete. The massive iron rig did not roll straight. It violently swerved, the momentum whipping the heavy metal corner directly toward my torso. The heavy iron frame slammed brutally into my right shoulder. The sudden, immense kinetic force threw my entire body off balance. My steel-toed boots scrambled for traction on the dusty concrete, but there was nothing to grip. My left foot slid completely off the jagged, unprotected edge of the open mechanical service pit. Gravity took over with terrifying, instantaneous speed. I plummeted backward into the dark trench. The world spun into a blur of raw concrete and flashing lights. I hit the lower subfloor with a sickening, heavy thud. My right arm instinctively shot out to break the fall, and my wrist slammed squarely against the sharp, exposed steel edge of a high-voltage conduit routing box. I heard the bones snap with a crisp, horrific crack that echoed in my own ears. Simultaneously, my left knee twisted violently inward under the awkward, crushing weight of my falling body, the tendons tearing with a sickening pop. The final impact was my head. My forehead violently struck the lower concrete step. A brilliant, blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes, followed immediately by a wave of crushing, nauseating darkness. I lay sprawled on my back in the thick construction dust at the bottom of the pit. The air was knocked completely out of my lungs. A profound, paralyzing agony began to radiate from my shattered wrist and my ruined knee, syncing with the heavy, frantic pounding of my heart. I blinked, my vision swimming, and felt the warm, thick slide of blood running down my temple and pooling into the corner of my left eye. High above me, the bright, blinding lights of the videographer's setup cast harsh shadows across the ceiling. I could hear the frantic, panicked sounds of the crew shouting in the distance, and then, cutting through the ringing in my ears, I heard Owen scream my name. It was a raw, visceral sound of pure terror. I forced my eyes open, staring up at the edge of the pit. I saw Owen's silhouette sprint toward the drop. He was about to climb down, about to reach for me. Then, another shadow abruptly eclipsed his, Bianca. She grabbed him tightly by the shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into his jacket. Her voice was no longer a vicious whisper. It was a high-pitched, frantic hiss of pure, calculating self-preservation. She explicitly ordered him not to touch me. She told him that if they stayed down there, if the police arrived and saw her standing near the hazard, I would absolutely tell them she pushed me. She frantically insisted that her brand, their venue, and their entire future would be destroyed by a massive lawsuit if they became legally implicated in the accident. Down in the suffocating dust, fighting through a thick haze of concussive shock and blinding physical agony, I waited for my brother to shove her away. I waited for him to reject her insane, callous logic, to climb down into the dirt and act like the family he always claimed to be. He froze. He looked down at me, his eyes wide and terrified. staring directly at the blood matting my hair and the unnatural broken angle of my arm. He looked at the woman gripping his coat, and then he made his choice. He did not fight her. He simply turned around. I lay there in the cold dirt, staring up at the empty ceiling as the sound of their frantic, retreating footsteps echoed away toward the heavy metal exit doors. The bright promotional lights continued to burn fiercely, illuminating the empty space where my brother had just stood. In that exact, agonizing moment, the final, crushing truth settled over me. Owen was not a helpless victim manipulated by a toxic woman. When forced to choose between saving his bleeding sister or protecting his own cowardly, comfortable existence, he actively, willingly chose to walk away. The attending physician, a hollow-eyed man running on stale coffee and graveyard shift adrenaline, finally pulled back the heavy privacy curtain of my trauma bay. He handed me the finalized discharge paperwork with a grim, practiced expression. He delivered the concrete parameters of my immediate future in short, clipped sentences. I was strictly forbidden from operating a motor vehicle for a minimum of 8 weeks. I was not allowed to bear any functional weight on my left leg, and there was absolutely no scenario where I could scale extension ladders, navigate uneven commercial terrain, or lift anything heavier than 10 pounds for the next 6 months. My career, the singular engine that funded my independence, was effectively and completely frozen. I thanked him quietly, awkwardly adjusting the heavy, rigid brace encasing my knee. Once I was alone again, I picked up my phone. The digital draft of my email to the commercial lender was still sitting open on the screen, glowing in the dim light. My mind, sharpened by a decade of reading impossibly dense insurance policies and liability contracts, immediately pulled up the exact legal phrasing of the commercial guarantee agreement I had signed 4 months prior. I remembered Section 4, Paragraph B, with crystal clarity. It was the Material Adverse Change Clause. It explicitly dictated that the underwriting bank reserved the absolute, unquestionable right to freeze all pending loan disbursements if the primary guarantor experienced a significant detrimental reduction in their earning capacity. Furthermore, the clause could be instantly triggered if the subject property incurred severe, unmitigated physical safety violations prior to securing a final certificate of occupancy. I kept every trace of personal emotion out of the draft. I kept the draft strictly factual and addressed it directly to the lead commercial lender, the regional title agent, the managing escrow attorney, the mortgage broker, and the senior underwriting team. Typing with my left thumb, I refined the first paragraph. I attached certified medical records, documented the severity of my injuries, and formally notified the lender that my ability to perform field inspections and maintain my verified income level was suspended for at least 6 months. I requested an immediate hold on closing documents and funding pending a guarantor risk reassessment. Then, I added a second, lethal paragraph. It was a perfectly placed legal landmine designed specifically for Owen and Bianca. Then I added the second paragraph, the legal landmine. I formally advised the underwriting team that I had personally observed severe active site hazards, including unapproved structural additions and an unbarricaded mechanical service pit. While the venue was preparing to host outside guests that same evening, I read the words one final time. It was a masterpiece of corporate assassination. I hit send. Without pausing, I opened a new, separate email thread addressed directly to my personal real estate attorney, Dana Pike. Dana was an absolute shark in a tailored suit who specialized in untangling toxic financial contracts. I instructed her to initiate an immediate, aggressive legal review regarding the extraction of my personal duplex as secondary collateral. I informed her that I had highly credible reason to believe the project budget and structural addendums had been materially altered and submitted to the lender without my legally required verified written consent. I told her to prepare to file an emergency halt order the minute the banks opened. By midnight, my phone began a relentless, vibrating dance across the metal tray table. Call after call, text after text poured in. The caller ID flashed Owen's name, then Bianca's, then Owen's again. The text messages shifted rapidly from confusing inquiries about where I had gone to demanding instructions to return their calls, to escalating hostile accusations about why I was ignoring them. I declined none of the calls. I let every one of them ring out into the sterile, humming silence of the hospital room. I methodically took screenshots of every single frantic, increasingly angry text message and dropped them directly into my encrypted digital folder. They were handing me the exact documentation I needed to prove their state of mind. At 9 o'clock the following morning, the massive corporate machinery of the commercial bank reacted with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. I received a carbon copy of the formal, automated notice sent by the lead commercial underwriter to all parties involved. Funding was officially suspended pending an emergency, comprehensive site and financial risk review. The fallout was completely instantaneous. I would later learn the precise details from a mutual industry contact. Bianca had been standing in the exact center of her dusty, unapproved venue, wearing a designer dress and smiling brightly for the cameras, fully prepared to serve imported champagne and miniature crab cakes to a dozen elite wedding planners. Right at that exact moment, the bank's stop-work notice hit Owen's inbox, and the escrow attorney froze the final wire transfer. The boutique caterers, realizing they were not going to be paid for the evening, immediately packed up their expensive hot boxes and walked out. The highly anticipated, exclusive preview dinner was abruptly and humiliatingly canceled right in front of the most influential event partners in the entire city. But the true crushing weight of my single email was not about a ruined dinner party or a bruised ego. It was the massive financial guillotine now suspended directly over their heads. To secure the venue initially, Owen and Bianca had drained their entire combined life savings to put down a massive, non-refundable hard money deposit. In commercial real estate, earnest money goes hard after the due diligence period expires. If the commercial bank officially pulled the final $2 million loan due to guarantor incapacity and severe safety violations, Owen and Bianca would not just lose the beautiful brick building, they would completely forfeit hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, officially defaulting on the master purchase agreement because they could not close the deal by the end of the week. The countdown had started, and I held the only key to the vault. Bianca did not hire a crisis management firm, nor did she attempt to negotiate a quiet, logical settlement with the commercial bank. Instead, less than 24 hours after the catastrophic funding suspension notice hit her inbox, she went entirely rogue. She launched a live video broadcast from the front passenger seat of their parked luxury sports utility vehicle. Through the windshield behind her head, the cheap, flickering neon signage of the boutique motel they were temporarily renting in the suburbs reflected off the glass. She was sobbing. It was a spectacular, terrifyingly polished performance. She stared directly into her smartphone lens, her mascara perfectly smudged just enough to convey raw devastation without ruining her carefully curated aesthetic, and told her 50,000 loyal followers that I had maliciously destroyed their entire future. Her voice trembled with manufactured trauma as she completely inverted the reality of the previous afternoon. She spun a vivid, horrifying narrative, claiming that I had stormed onto the active job site in a state of unhinged, jealous rage. She looked straight into the camera and swore to her audience that I had caused a massive, violent scene, screaming at the contractors before physically shoving her backward into a pile of raw materials. She painted herself as the helpless, fragile victim of a bitter, lonely woman. Then, she delivered the killing blow to my reputation. She stated that because I had failed to physically intimidate her, I was now using my financial leverage as a weapon to completely strangle a blossoming, female-owned small business out of pure, vindictive spite. The most devastating moment of the broadcast did not come from Bianca. However, it came from my own blood. Halfway through her tearful monologue, Owen leaned forward from the driver's seat, bringing his face into the tight digital frame. He looked appropriately haggard, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply supportive partner to absolute perfection. He did not utter a single syllable, but as Bianca recounted the fake physical assault, Owen looked directly into the lens and gave a slow, solemn nod of confirmation. That single, silent movement was a profound, unforgivable betrayal. It anchored her calculated lies to reality. It signaled to everyone watching that my own brother was siding with his fiancée against his flesh and blood. It gave her fabricated story a sickening weight of credibility. Before ending the stream, Bianca expertly pivoted from victimhood to monetization. She pinned a direct crowdfunding link right to the top of the live comment section. She begged her community of future brides and lifestyle enthusiasts to rally together and save a dream that was being violently ripped away by corporate sabotage. She was actively weaponizing public sympathy to replace the millions of dollars the bank had just frozen, effectively raising capital from strangers while simultaneously destroying my character. The real-world consequences materialized almost immediately. As the primary guarantor listed on the public corporate registry, my professional email inbox began to flood. Several of the 12 couples who had illegally pre-booked the venue had seen the viral broadcast. Panic set in rapidly. They began sending aggressive emails demanding immediate, full refunds of their massive cash deposits. A few of the more legally savvy clients copied their personal attorneys on the email threads, explicitly threatening massive civil lawsuits because they realized the venue had taken thousands of dollars in payments without actually possessing a valid safety certification or a legal right to host public events. The walls were rapidly closing in on the glass lantern depot. Meanwhile, my personal phone lit up with a relentless barrage of text messages from Owen. His audacity was truly staggering. He adopted a tone of frantic, hypocritical diplomacy. He texted that if I would just post a public apology and withdraw my hold with the underwriting team, the online hate would stop immediately. He typed that Bianca was having a complete panic attack and that I was pushing her over the absolute edge. His final message read, verbatim, "Please just drop this and do not ruin my entire future over a simple misunderstanding." I did not type a single letter in response. I refused to engage in a desperate, emotional mudslinging contest. Instead, I calmly screen-recorded the entire length of the live broadcast. I saved the donation link, the transaction routing numbers, and every single manipulative text message Owen had just sent me. I packaged the entire digital footprint and forwarded it directly to Dana Pike. I instructed my attorney to preserve and formally flag the content for defamation, libel, and potential wire fraud tied to the unverified crowdfunding campaign. A few hours later, things escalated again. Bianca uploaded a high-resolution photo to her main feed. It was a close-up shot of her left forearm, displaying a massive, ugly purple and yellow bruise blooming across her pale skin. The bold caption explicitly claimed it was the physical result of my unprovoked attack at the construction site. I stared at the image on my screen. Something about the lighting felt inherently wrong. The background shadow did not match the bright, dusty environment of the depot, and the thick fabric visible at the very edge of the frame looked like a heavy winter coat, not the lightweight white silk suit she had been wearing yesterday. I did not possess the technical software skills to prove it in that exact second, but a cold, hard instinct told me the hidden digital metadata embedded in that image file would absolutely reveal it was taken months ago. The absolute proof was hovering just out of reach, buried in the digital code. By nightfall, the digital atmosphere was completely suffocating. The online court of public opinion had overwhelmingly sided with the weeping, beautiful bride-to-be. Strangers were leaving hundreds of vile, aggressive comments under the video, tearing apart my physical appearance, my supposed jealousy, and my moral character. The narrative was entirely out of my control, twisting into a massive, public spectacle of targeted hatred directed squarely at me. Yet, lying in the quiet dark of my apartment with my heavily splinted arm resting on an elevated pillow, I chose absolute, unwavering silence. I issued no statement and posted no frantic defense. I let them scream into the digital void, let them build their fraudulent empire on camera, and let them collect their illegal donations. I was not waiting for the internet to suddenly develop a conscience and offer me its fickle sympathy. I was simply waiting for the forensic data to arrive. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I used my uninjured left hand to dial Wes Calder. I was done waiting for noise to die down online, and I was done waiting for my brother to grow a spine. I needed evidence, not opinions. Wes let out a low, gravelly sigh that crackled through the phone speaker. He confirmed the system was fully operational, wired directly to a secure off-site cloud server, and boasted a wide-angle lens that perfectly covered the entire mechanical service pit. More importantly, he confirmed it possessed a commercial-grade microphone that recorded high-quality audio. Then, Wes surprised me. He told me he had already exported the master file from the server the previous night. He made it abundantly clear he was not doing this out of some deep, emotional loyalty to me. Wes was a harsh pragmatist who had survived 3 decades in commercial construction by strictly avoiding legal crossfire. He had seen the viral broadcast. He knew the situation was about to detonate into a massive legal battlefield, and he had absolutely no intention of being dragged into a civil deposition and pressured to commit perjury for a woman who treated his skilled crew like disposable servants. He wanted the undeniable truth secured on the record, solely to protect his own commercial contractor license. Less than 10 minutes later, a massive encrypted digital file landed in my inbox. Sitting at my kitchen island, I pressed play. The digital timestamp glowing brightly in the bottom corner locked the reality into place. The footage was stark, initially silent, and completely damning. From the elevated, wide-angle perspective, the entire sequence played out like a slow-motion architectural disaster. I watched the tiny, crisp figure of Bianca explicitly ordering the crew to drag the heavy orange safety barricades away from the open trench. I watched her aggressively grab the industrial caster wheels of the towering floral rig, intentionally dragging the massive iron structure dangerously close to the sheer drop for a better camera angle. Then, the audio track kicked in, catching the sharp, echoing acoustics of our argument. Every vicious, condescending word she spat at me was recorded with chilling clarity. The camera captured the exact, violent moment she lost her temper. She did not just stumble or panic. She deliberately, forcefully shoved the heavy metal cart directly into my path. The wheels hit the drywall dust. The frame violently swerved, and my body disappeared from the frame into the dark pit. The terrifying, heavy thud of my skull hitting the concrete subfloor echoed brutally through my laptop speakers, but the most crucial, devastating piece of evidence came seconds later. The microphone picked up my brother's frantic, terrified voice from the edge of the pit. He screamed to call 911. There was a brief, agonizing pause. Then, Bianca's voice, sharp, cold, and entirely devoid of panic, sliced through the dusty air. She commanded him to stop, saying no. We leave now. That single, isolated audio clip completely obliterated the weeping, victimized narrative she was currently selling to 50,000 people on the internet. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I immediately forwarded the unedited video file to the local police precinct and copied Dana Pike. My attorney did not just acknowledge receipt, she weaponized the data. Within 2 hours, Dana filed aggressive legal requests to subpoena the master cloud logs from the security company to prove the footage was entirely unaltered. She demanded the digital access logs for the electronic front doors of the depot and subpoenaed the group text messages of the entire construction crew to establish an undeniable timeline of Bianca's reckless directives. While Dana was laying the concrete groundwork for criminal negligence charges, a secondary, far heavier blow landed. She called me just before noon, her tone stripped of its usual sharp confidence, replaced by a grave, heavy seriousness. During her forensic audit of the commercial loan documents, Dana had discovered a newly executed financial addendum. It was the massive budget expansion for the glass catwalk entrance that I had explicitly refused to sign right before I fell. Yet, the document had been submitted to the underwriting bank the previous morning, featuring a perfectly verified, time-stamped electronic signature bearing my exact legal name. I felt the air completely leave my lungs. I told Dana I was physically lying in an emergency room bed, heavily medicated on painkillers, at the exact hour that digital document was allegedly signed, Dana immediately brought in a forensic information technology specialist to trace the digital certificate's origin. It took the expert less than 4 hours to pull the unique device identifier and the Internet Protocol address attached to the fraudulent signature. The digital footprint did not lead back to Bianca's sleek new smartphone. It led directly to an old, third-generation tablet I had loaned to my brother over a year ago so he could review structural blueprints. He had used my administrative login token, which I had foolishly forgotten to log out of, to bypass the two-factor authentication. Owen could not hide behind his fiancée's manic behavior for this one. He could not claim he was just an innocent, overwhelmed bystander who panicked in the heat of a terrible accident. Forging a primary guarantor's signature on a commercial loan document submitted to the underwriting bank was a severe, premeditated financial felony. The institutional dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. The commercial lender immediately escalated their internal funding suspension into a full-blown corporate fraud investigation, bringing in their own compliance officers to review the forged addendum. Simultaneously, the commercial liability insurance provider caught wind of the illegal deposit collections. They formally notified Dana that they were launching a separate, aggressive review of the master policy, taking thousands of dollars in non-refundable pre-bookings for an uncertified, hazardous construction site constituted a material misrepresentation of business operations, a direct and fatal violation of their underwriting terms. Sitting alone in my quiet apartment, surrounded by printed emails and digital evidence files, a cold, absolute clarity finally washed over me. This was no longer just about a tragic accident or a petty, toxic argument at a dusty construction site. This was a sprawling, systemic labyrinth of financial deceit, calculated fraud, and deliberate endangerment. And Owen was not just a weak, easily manipulated man caught in the crossfire of a terrible woman. Whether out of active, greedy malice or desperate, pathetic cowardice, my brother had willingly picked up the digital pen and become an active, legally culpable architect of my destruction. The crushing weight of the pending criminal investigation and the imminent loss of their massive, non-refundable cash deposit finally broke my brother's cowardly silence. 72 hours after I hit the concrete floor of the service pit, the chime of my apartment video doorbell pierced the quiet of my living room. I limped heavily to the wall monitor, leaning my weight on my crutches, and looked at the digital screen. Owen was standing in the hallway. The golden, effortless charm that had effortlessly carried him through his entire adult life had completely evaporated. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were bloodshot and ringed with heavy, dark exhaustion, and the perfectly tailored designer jacket he usually wore was wrinkled and hanging loosely on his frame. He no longer looked like the diplomatic middleman trying to keep the peace. He looked like a man staring directly over the edge of a sheer financial cliff. He pressed the intercom button, his voice cracking through the tiny speaker. He practically begged me to call off the lawyers and withdraw the formal complaint with the commercial lender. He pleaded that Bianca was just incredibly overwhelmed, that she was seeing red and did not genuinely mean for anyone to get hurt. He promised, with a desperate, frantic edge to his voice, that if I just let the loan closing proceed, they would slowly pay me back every single dime I had advanced them once the luxury venue was running smoothly. I stared at his digital image. I never touched the deadbolt. I didn't open the door even an inch. I pressed the microphone button and spoke with a voice stripped entirely of familial warmth. I told him that a man who abandons his bleeding sister in the dirt, and a man who uses a stolen tablet to forge a legally binding electronic signature, no longer possesses the right to ask for my trust. I released the button and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the sterile hallway, realizing that emotional manipulation was completely useless. Bianca abruptly shifted her strategy. 2 days later, a formal demand letter landed in Dana Pike's inbox. It was not from Bianca herself, but from a high-priced defense attorney her wealthy family had quickly retained to stop the bleeding. They were offering a private, out-of-court mediation. The proposed terms were incredibly specific. They offered to gradually reimburse my advanced construction funds through a structured installment plan, but only if I signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement permanently burying the security footage. Dana printed the 30-page document, highlighted a single paragraph buried deep in the 7th section, and slid it across her heavy mahogany desk toward me. The clause was a brilliantly disguised legal trap. It explicitly demanded that in exchange for the slow repayment of my own money, I was legally mandated to formally withdraw my active police report and entirely waive my right to cooperate with the bank's internal fraud investigation unit. Dana tapped the highlighted paper with her expensive pen. She told me with a sharp, satisfied smile that this document was not a peace offering. It was a glaring, neon sign of absolute terror. They were no longer just worried about losing the brick building. They were genuinely terrified of facing severe, multi-year prison sentences for financial forgery and criminal negligence. I told Dana to reject the offer immediately, but my attorney was a master strategist. She advised me not to slam the door entirely shut just yet. She proposed that we accept a formal recorded deposition session under the guise of exploring their settlement terms. Dana wanted them sitting in a room, on the official audio record, simply to let them talk. She wanted to gather more contradictions before the final legal strike. The deposition took place in a sterile, glass-walled conference room at Dana's downtown firm. Bianca sat rigidly across the massive oak table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a conservative beige sweater, playing the role of the exhausted, misunderstood victim to absolute perfection. Her family lawyer did most of the talking, trying to smoothly navigate the liability discussions, but Dana was relentless, weaving seemingly innocent, highly specific questions about the sequence of events at the construction site. She asked Bianca to clarify her exact physical position right before my fall. Bianca, desperate to reinforce her fabricated innocence, leaned toward the microphone resting in the center of the table. She stated with absolute, unwavering confidence that she never laid a single finger on the heavy metal floral cart. Under oath, she claimed she had been standing at least 5 feet away, completely still, when I supposedly lost my balance and stumbled backward into the open pit. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, but inside, a sharp, icy surge of triumph moved through me. Dana thanked her for the clarification in an even tone and quickly wrapped up the session. Bianca had just formally, legally committed perjury. Her recorded statement flatly contradicted the high-definition cloud footage and the subpoenaed text messages in which she explicitly ordered the safety barricades removed. She had only made her own legal position far worse with every word. But the next morning delivered a brutal, unexpected turn clearly meant to break my resolve. My phone lit up with a new flood of notifications. Bianca, sensing the legal pressure closing in and desperate to protect her crowdfunding income stream, played her most toxic card yet. She posted a new, heavily manipulated video clip across all of her social media channels. It was clearly a piece of the security footage, but it had been aggressively sliced, cropped, and digitally altered to completely remove the context. The audio was muted. The frame was zoomed in tight, cutting out the heavy metal card entirely. It only showed a distorted split-second movement where my body shifted forward due to the impact of the cart, making it look exactly like I was aggressively lunging toward her in a violent rage. The video abruptly cut to black right before the shove occurred. The online reaction was instantaneous and deafening. The digital tide, which had been quietly waiting for more drama, violently turned against me once again. Thousands of shares, thousands of hateful comments, and a massive surge in donations to her fraudulent campaign flooded the internet. The suffocating weight of public hatred pressed down on my chest, a heavy, suffocating blanket of lies. I called Dana, my voice tight with exhaustion, ready to finally break my silence and release the full, unedited video to the public. Dana stopped me instantly. Her voice was not panicked. It was chillingly calm, vibrating with a ruthless, predatory satisfaction. She told me this was an excellent development. She instructed me to let them post every single altered frame, to let them collect every single fraudulent dollar, and to let them bask in their fake digital validation for just a few more days. The digital metadata embedded in that spliced file, she explained quietly, alongside the timestamp of the actual assault, was going to be the final, undeniable hammer blow we would use to shatter their entire existence in open court. The final collapse was not one dramatic courtroom scene. It unfolded over the next several weeks as overlapping legal and financial actions hit all at once. Civil filings, criminal proceedings, and the lender's final decision on the frozen bridge loan. Bianca walked into the joint arbitration room on a crisp Tuesday morning looking like a radiant, misunderstood martyr. Her wealthy family had paid a premium for a defense team that immediately doubled down on their fabricated narrative. They confidently presented me as a deeply bitter, controlling older sister who was using financial blackmail to destroy a beautiful creative project out of pure spite. Bianca sat beside them, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, fully believing her own carefully constructed lies. Then, Dana Pike systematically dismantled their entire universe. Dana did not raise her voice. She simply opened a sleek leather binder and began distributing the puzzle pieces they had so recklessly left behind. First came the unedited, full-length cloud security footage. Dana projected it onto the large screen at the end of the conference table. The room watched in dead silence as crisp audio filled the space. They watched Bianca explicitly order the safety barricades removed. They watched her aggressively drag the heavy iron cart. They heard the sickening crack of my bones. Most devastatingly, the audio echoed clearly off the glass walls. Owen yelling to call 911, and Bianca coldly commanding him to leave me in the dirt. Bianca's confident posture shattered instantly. Before her defense attorneys could even attempt to object or spin the context, Dana dropped the second piece of evidence. She handed over a certified forensic digital audit of Bianca's social media accounts. The report conclusively proved that the viral video clip had been artificially sliced and its internal timestamps completely manipulated to hide the shove. Furthermore, the digital metadata embedded in the photograph of Bianca's bruised arm proved the picture was taken 3 full years prior during a winter skiing trip. She had actively defrauded her online audience to solicit thousands of dollars in illegal donations under false pretenses. The final strike was reserved exclusively for my brother. Dana slid a thick stack of printed location tracking coordinates and digital login logs across the polished wood table. She detailed how, at the exact minute the fraudulent construction addendum was electronically signed and submitted to the commercial bank, my corporate truck's location tracker and my active employee login placed me on a commercial roof 30 miles away from the city center. Simultaneously, the digital signature token was traced directly to an old tablet logged into Owen's personal home wireless network. Dana looked my brother dead in the eye and asked how a man with no legal authority had managed to forge a commercial loan addendum. Owen physically shrank into his expensive leather chair, all color completely draining from his face. He had absolutely no remaining exit. By Friday afternoon, the Commercial Underwriting Board issued their final, irreversible decree, citing severe material fraud, blatant safety violations, and forged financial instruments. The bank officially terminated the massive loan agreement. In the same certified letter, I was legally and permanently released from all guarantor obligations. The lien on my duplex was entirely dissolved, severing my financial ties to their sinking ship once and for all, facing a mountain of hard forensic evidence. Bianca's lawyers pushed her into a plea agreement to avoid a longer prison sentence. She pled guilty to reckless endangerment, filing a false police report, and wire fraud tied to the crowdfunding campaign. The court ordered restitution, and the fallout effectively ended her lifestyle brand. Owen did not get a cinematic redemption arc. He was left completely stranded in the wreckage of his own cowardice. The property seller kept their massive hard cash deposit, leaving him buried under insurmountable personal debt. He faced severe civil liabilities from the angry couples who had illegally pre-booked the venue. Late one evening, he showed up at my door again, tears streaming down his face, offering a pathetic, desperate apology. I looked at the man who had stood over my broken body, and chosen his own comfort. I quietly closed the heavy front door, locking the deadbolt firmly in his face. I refused to be his financial lifeboat ever again. Over the next 8 months, my body slowly healed. The heavy plaster cast came off my wrist, and the torn ligaments in my knee knitted back together through grueling physical therapy. I kept my beautiful duplex. I used the court-ordered restitution funds, and the vast amount of money I was no longer bleeding into their toxic dream. To completely renovate my own home according to my true needs, I built a custom kitchen and upgraded my living space. I did not do it to show off on the internet. I did it to create a quiet, safe sanctuary where I could finally live in perfect peace. Here is the absolute truth about betrayal for anyone listening. The attacker might shove you into the dark and cause you physical pain once, but the bystander who watches you bleed and texts you to stay away is the one you have been paying to betray you for years. I did not win because I executed a loud, dramatic revenge. I won because I finally recognized my own worth, and I chose to stop funding the cruelty of people who never truly loved me. If this story hit home for you, you're not alone. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and share it so more people can hear it.